Today, we're super excited to have with us Emma Elizalde. She is from the International Dyslexia Association of Northern California branch. She is currently a reading specialist at Town School for Boys in San Francisco. She also has a private practice where she works with students who have language-based challenges. She previously worked as a 3rd and 4th grade teacher at Northbridge Academy. She holds a certificate in education therapy from Holy Names University, a master's in education from the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and a BA in psychology in education from Mount Holyoke College. So welcome, Emma, and you can go ahead and turn yourself on and start your screen share.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here and to present with you guys today. Let me start sharing my screen. I do this every day with kids, but it's a little different sometimes to a room of adults I can't see. So today we're talking about understanding dyslexia and what helps. So, like was said, I have an extensive knowledge and interest in dyslexia. It started back when I graduated undergrad, and I was like, I am interested in education, but I want to know what the neuroscience behind that is. So I went to Harvard and studied neuroscience in education, and I saw that it was so theoretical, and I went, okay, what do you do when you're in the classroom? So I then went to Holy Names and I learned some practical pieces of this is how you can look at neuroscience. Here are some tools and techniques you can use in the classroom, and here's how you can implement it. And then went, I need even more information. I need something really specific that's really going to target the students that I want to work with. That led me to doing some Slingerland training, and I've done a bunch of it. I feel like almost every other summer I do a Slingerland training to know more. I've done Orton Gillingham training. I've done some structured word inquiry, just so I can get as much information as I can, so I'm always learning. This has then led me to working at a school called Northbridge Academy. It's a school for kids with dyslexia. I was a founding teacher. It was exciting to help develop a curriculum for the first time to say, what are kids? How will they learn best? We're going to implement Slingerland, and what other components can we put in place? And later on, you'll see some examples of students' work that I have worked with. Today, I work at a school called Town. I'm a reading specialist there, and I'm implementing and working with teachers to create best practices. Like was said earlier, I'm the president of the Northern California branch of the International Dyslexia Association. Total mouthful. This is my 2nd year and last year as president, and it's been an exciting journey to kind of take charge of this organization that I've been a part of for, I believe, at least 6 years. I have a private practice where I work with students after school or before early in the morning, those kids who wake up so early, where I support them in structured literacy support. I am also dyslexic myself. I've been dyslexic since I was in preschool. I had a great preschool teacher who told my mom and said, you know what, I think there's something a little different about the way Emma learns. And luckily I got support starting in kindergarten, got diagnosed really early, and got the supports that I needed. Even so, I still struggled and still use technology today. And I'll probably end up talking a little bit about my own experience as a student with dyslexia and kind of how I was supported and how that's framed my journey and knowledge. So dyslexia, and what is it? So this is a definition from IDA that I'm going to read out loud, and then I'm going to unpack it in a visual way. So what is dyslexia? Dyslexia is a specific learning disability that is neurobiological in origin. It is characterized by difficulties with accurate and/or fluent word recognition and by poor spelling and decoding abilities. These difficulties typically result from a deficit in the phonological component of language that is often unexpected in relation to other cognitive abilities and the provision of effective classroom instruction. Secondary consequences may include problems in reading comprehension and reduced reading experience that can impede growth of vocabulary and background knowledge. Now, I know the first time I read that definition, I went, that's a mouthful. So here's a kind of a broken apart visual of that definition. So if you start at the top up here, and I'm not sure you can see my mouse or not, but at the top it says a deficit in phonological component of language. Well, what is that? Well, phonology is the ability to manipulate speech sounds. So if I were to segment and blend, to rhyme, all of those components are phonology. So that is not connected to letters. The ability to say, my word is cat, how many sounds are there? K, at. I have 3 sounds. I can manipulate those sounds. Or to say the word cowboy, don't say cow. And to be able to pull that piece apart and see what you still have left. Those components then lead to decoding, spelling, accuracy, and fluency. Decoding being the ability to break words apart. Can you identify your vowels? Can you split your words into their syllable types? Can you blend all of your sounds together? Spelling. Can you say your word? Can you pick apart all of those sounds? Can you break apart the syllables to then break apart all the sounds and identify your vowels? Accuracy. Can you put those components into more fluid practice? And fluency. Can you be fluent in your reading, in your spelling, which then leads to greater tasks such as writing? All of these components then break down further into comprehension and a larger tier, reading experience. If you're struggling with all of those foundational skills, that experience you have is going to be different. You might not want to experience reading, which will then impact your vocabulary and your background knowledge. If you're not reading and getting the vocabulary and background knowledge, your comprehension then suffers. So that's kind of a visual of what dyslexia looks like. Now, as I said at the beginning, neuroscience to me was really important. Why does my brain work the way that it does? I knew there were answers. So here's a visual from Shaywitz's Overcoming Dyslexia of what a neurotypical or non-impaired brain looks like while reading versus a dyslexic brain. Now, students who struggle with reading have less activity, and you can see that here. Over here, you see that there's activity in a non-impaired or a neurotypical student when they read, to make the connections between letters, their sounds, and all those components. And here in a dyslexic brain, without intervention, you're seeing there's less activity. So a multisensory or multimodal, meaning, the visual component, kinesthetic, auditory, all of those components, that structured language instruction, those will teach students the strategies they need to make the connections between the areas that they're not using back here. So what are some signs of dyslexia? So some signs of dyslexia are learning the letters and their sounds. When I see a letter, can I recall the sound it goes with? When I hear or make a sound, can I put a letter to that name, to that sound? Organizing written and spoken language. Can I have thoughts of, okay, I want to say this. Okay, now how do I then get it onto paper? Memorizing number facts, that recall, right? I stored it somewhere. Can I go back and find it when I'm ready for it? Reading quickly enough to comprehend. I know for me, I still read very slowly, but I'm trying to be calm while I'm reading out loud to you guys. But reading quickly enough to comprehend, for me, I'm always frustrated that I can read to comprehend, but it's not fast enough to get me where I need to be. Persisting with and comprehending longer reading assignments, spelling, learning a foreign language, and correctly doing math operations. If you have a page filled with addition and subtraction facts, are you just quickly going through, or are you noticing, oh, I see, this is actually a subtraction fact. Oh, they tricked me, the next one's addition, and I gotta switch between those two modalities. And what does it look like in the classroom, and what are some school effects? And for each student with dyslexia, it's different. Dyslexia, again, is kind of an umbrella term, and everyone falls differently on that kind of spectrum of dyslexia. You can be severely dyslexic, you can be mildly dyslexic. For myself, I am fairly severely dyslexic. My sister, on the other hand, is not. She's a writer, which I would never want to be as a profession, But for her, she goes, I don't identify with dyslexia because I don't feel like it impacts me the way it impacts you. So for some students, classroom effects could be word recognition. When you're reading a book or when a word is presented, can you recognize that word automatically? Are you able to blend those sounds together? Reading fluency. Maybe you might hear students reading a little choppy, stopping at a hard word that they don't know, maybe leaving some words out. Spelling. Maybe students aren't able to recall sight words and how they're spelled, or even to recognize, to be able to segment sounds, to be able to spell phonetically, words that are able to be phonetically spelled. All those kind of foundational skills will then impact your ability to write. If you're not able to spell a word and it's time for you to write a sentence, well, you've held all your sentence in your head and then it's time to write, and then you get stuck on a word and you go, okay, well, now I have to think about this. And by the time maybe you've spelled your word, you go, well, what was my sentence? And then we have to think about that later on. How about a paragraph or an essay? And we're asking kids who might not have those foundational skills to then have to write something where they have to hold so much in their brain. This then impacts grammar, understanding textbook material, writing that essay. And I think the social emotional impact. I mean, I know for myself, my mom and my tutor, my ed therapist, they always made a comment in 7th grade, which was my low point, of Emma always wears a hoodie with the hood up and her head down. And we never get to see her pretty face or the nice clothes that she's wearing. She always covers herself up. And I think that the impact of struggling in these areas is huge on a student's self-esteem and how they view themselves in a classroom. If you're struggling in a classroom, you see your peers succeeding. And as you move through the grades, you see the deficit grow and you see your peers really moving beyond where you are. And it hurts. And some kids shy back. Some kids might, act out. And I find it very interesting, the differences between different students. I know myself as a student, I shied away and said, I wish I were invisible. Don't look at me. And if I don't move, maybe they won't notice me. But I took a simulation that our branch will put on at times. And I was very surprised. I was like, you know what? I've been through it. I've lived dyslexia. I am dyslexia. I'm living it. I'm not going to have a reaction here. I did this already. And I was really surprised at the reaction I had during that simulation, which was acting out. And I was calling out people who were getting praise. And I was like, great for you. I'm so glad you know how to read. And after the simulation and reflecting, I went, wow, I wasn't that kid in school, but now I'm at a place in my life where I'm like, I'm seeing that I didn't want to work that hard for something that I didn't know where it would get me. And I see a lot of my students in that space too. So I think it's, we have to have that perspective on how the social emotional impact does affect so many of our students and that it looks different for each person. So that's kind of an overview of what dyslexia is. And now I want to talk a little bit about assessment. And assessment is not something that I do in my practice, but I think it's important to know that, especially in a public school, it's important that assessments exist so students get the supports that they need. I happen to work in a private school, which I think is unique in that you don't need assessment to get services, but I know that it is important in a public school that it is necessary. So, who's able to assess for a specific learning disability? So that person must have a higher degree in education, reading, speech-language pathology, school psychology, or neuropsychology. I think something that's important is that oftentimes you can have an assessment done where you have someone with an education background do the educational piece of the assessment, but often there's a cognitive assessment that goes along with it where you need the psychologist or a neuropsychologist in order to sometimes make that official diagnosis. When someone with an education background, like a reading teacher or a resource specialist or a speech language pathologist, often those educational assessments that are given will give you the knowledge of, yes, there's something going on here, and here are the places where they're successful, and here are the places where, my child is struggling. But you then need that cognitive component to be done in order to really make that clear diagnosis. But a diagnosis does not need, and is rarely done, I don't think ever, by a medical doctor. So you do not need a medical doctor to make a diagnosis. Instead, you need someone with the educational background and or a psychology or neuroscience background. The tests that students are given to diagnose a learning disability or something else cover a wide range of skills. The phonological awareness component, so what we talked about earlier, the ability to segment, blend, rhyme, say cowboy but don't say cow, and having the strength in those abilities, because oftentimes that's the umbrella that then leads down to success in being able to decode and spell. Phonological or language-based memory, rapid automatic naming, which has been a key test, and I think a lot of science has come out recently about the importance of that, and a lot of screeners that are being developed for, iPads or something on your device. A lot of them are using that rapid automatic naming assessment tool to get a hint of, is your student maybe struggling? Should you have a concern? Receptive vocabulary, the vocabulary that comes in, phonics skills, decoding, oral reading fluency, single word recognition, sentence and paragraph knowledge, spelling, writing, things at a sentence level, a paragraph level. They look at math, calculations, word problems, and fluency. So instruction based off of the knowledge of the neuroscience, and often based off sometimes an assessment, it's important to implement the appropriate instruction. Effective instruction for a student with dyslexia is structured literacy. That's taking all of those components, that auditory, visual, kinesthetic, using all of those pieces and marrying them together. As you saw in the neuroscience, in that image of the brain, there are pieces in the brain of a dyslexic student or adult who's not been taught that aren't firing, that aren't active, that aren't connecting to the pieces that are working. And with effective instruction and structured literacy, you're tapping into those sections. You're teaching phonology, the structure of our language. You're teaching the sound symbol correspondence. Here is the letter B. It says B, or what says B, B, and then you show the picture. Syllable division and the different syllable types. There are 6 different types of syllables. I know I've been giving tests all day. I know I said I didn't do tests, but in my 2nd grade class, I've been in charge of giving a phonological-based assessment for students, all 44 of them. And I find it so interesting that I've got students who know the syllable types, but when it comes to knowing the sound symbol association, it's kind of like, ooh, I get tied up. And I could guarantee if I asked, what are the 6 syllable types to those kids who can read, the fancy last word on the test, which is transportation, they probably wouldn't be able to split it up into those 6 types. The morphological component, can you see and split the word up into its meaningful parts, which is kind of a really fun activity. And I just did one with parents last week at parent night. The syntax, the grammar, the sentence structure, the mechanics, teaching that explicitly, the semantics, the comprehension component. Now, we can look at this diagram here that kind of shows what components lead to the next. And here we have at the top, understanding and speaking. These are things that often just come through life. It's not something that is often explicitly taught. Some kids do need that explicit instruction of creating speech sounds, but for a majority of kids, that comes naturally. That natural development of speech and understanding of speech is the predecessor to reading, which is the written version of what we speak. That component of reading will help verbalized expression. You're getting the vocabulary. It will also then come down into written expression. Anytime I have a student who struggles with written expression, and they go, I just don't know what to write. I say, you know what? let me ask you this question. And after a question I ask, let's say they're writing out their favorite candy bar. I go, what is your favorite candy bar? Answer me in a full sentence. They go, well, my favorite candy bar is Twix. They go, well, you just wrote your sentence. That verbalization that can come so naturally to so many dyslexic students is what they need for the written expression component. And these components are all then a function of a complete auditory, visual, and kinesthetic. What does structured literacy have to have? It needs to be systematic and cumulative. So when I work with a student, I look, what do you know and where are the holes? And how can I put those pieces into place that you're missing? It needs to be explicit. I don't just give a book to a kid and say, hey, we're going to read today. I hope we have a good time. I hope you figure out what the letters say, what sounds that they make. Oftentimes at school, kids are given books and say, we want to develop a joy and love of reading. Well, if your brain doesn't just figure it out, which as my mentor, Nancy White, always says, you can stick a bunch of kids in a coat closet and they're going to end up reading, the labels on things by themselves. They'll just figure it out. Well, some kids don't just figure it out, she says. And for those kids, they need the explicit instruction. They need to be shown, this letter says this sound. Repeat it. I want you to write it in the air. I want you to say it out loud. I want you to practice it. And it's diagnostic. When I teach a lesson, I look, okay, I know I've been teaching ER. Are they successful? Or do they still confuse it for the sound of R? Where do I need to adjust my teaching based off what the student has produced for me or demonstrated? So let me show you some examples. So this is a student that I worked with at Northbridge Academy. He had 5 days of Slingerland instruction that was an hour and a half long. We had word work time sometimes blended in there. Word work being, it was a independent practice of reading, fluency practice with me one-on-one, writing a sentence based off what you were reading, and some phonics packet work. In addition to that, he had English language arts a handful of times a week where we spent a little bit more time explicitly working on sentence development that led to paragraph development. So this is a student that did have a lot of work, but came to Northbridge not being able to spell well and reading at a kindergarten level. So this is our beginning of the year spelling assessment. You can see he had some Slingerland support before entering school. And this is the second page of the assessment, and he rocked blame. He knows that there needs to be a silent E at the end there. But then we have 7, 8, 9, and 10, where we see there are struggles in his ability to spell. Word 7 is supposed to be hibernate. We can see he's missing his second syllable vowel, the vowel that needs to be in his second syllable, and he hasn't identified correctly the vowel that needs to be in his third syllable. The same for number 8, dispute. He missed his vowel in his first syllable. You can also see here in his handwriting, his letters aren't formed the same every time. So if you see the B in blame and the B in hibernate, these B's are both the same letter, but they're formed differently. So every time he gets to one of those letters, he has to think, well, now how do I form this? Which is another cognitive load that's added on top. You have explode, again, missing some vowels, or misidentifying a vowel, or misidentifying a consonant sound for x. And rafting. This, I think, shows a good example of his morphological knowledge. He knows that there's the suffix ing at the end, but he doesn't realize that raft does not have a d sound in it, and that morphological base, R-A-F-T, does not have a D on it, and that's not actually a word in English. This is him 2 months, maybe 6 weeks later, after having explicit instruction. And I think this is a good example of how a lesson is kind of how it goes from start to finish. It starts with the smallest components. Let's start with practicing our handwriting. Can we form those letters Let's practice forming those letters. And you can see this BL connection. The L was a little wonky and he had to kind of go over it a couple times. We then add a little bit more here. All right, I'm going to give you a sound. You write down what represents that sound. Here we have him writing down all the representations he knows of these sounds. And you're probably seeing some of these stars and circles and underlines. And, well, there's 3 ways to spell k. So I then ask, okay, draw a shooting star over the most common way to spell k. Put a squiggly line under the one you'd use at the end of a short word after a short vowel. Underline the one you'd use before an E, I, or Y, because I need them to be able to pick when it comes to a word later on, which you'll see on the last line of this page. Well, if I am spelling the word smock, I have to pick, and I have to know the reasons behind these. See how explicit that is in teaching these sounds and how to apply them? After we review sounds, it's time to build words together. Pinch, blotch, smock, hedge. We then go even further. We practice words that you have to memorize. From, there. From has a great story behind it. That O, that's a scribal O. The scribes long ago thought writing a U and an M in cursive over and over again was too many ups and downs and ups and downs. And they just decided, you know what, I'm making it easier on myself. I'm changing it to an O. And that story can help kids go, oh, wait, it can't be a U. I'm going up and down and up and down and up and down. Oh, wait, it's an O. We practice writing words with patterns that we're going to use later on in our sentence. Here you'll see our sentence. The black raven had to defend his chicks from the snake. And you might be wondering, what are all these marks? At the end of him writing his sentence, he had to go back and make sure he wrote everything correctly and to decode his words. And this decoding skill is drawn specifically from our learning of reading. So underlining your vowels, if you have multisyllabic words like raven, underlining your vowels, dividing where you need to divide, marking up so you know what the vowel has said, really looking at your words to make sure you spelled them correctly. As you see here, he wrote defend, and then when you see he didn't even finish his D. Over here you can see his D's finished with a nice connecting stroke. Didn't finish his D here, he goes, oh, I know I forgot something. He bracketed his word and redid it and decoded to make sure it was correct. Same here with snake. He's writing, he's got his C and he goes, wait, I know I'm about to write an E. I know CE says, that would say snace. So again, bracket and rewrite. And this chops down here as a way of him to edit his own work without me having to go, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. And it gives him that independence and ownership over his work and knowledge to then fix his own mistakes. This is the end of the year assessment for him. You'll see we have moved to smaller paper. His handwriting has refined, and he got 100% on his assessment. You can see that he's decoded all of his words that he wrote. He got explode, which he didn't get the first time, blame. We put some harder words. We have longer phrases. And he was successful in looking at his own work to make sure he was correct the whole time.
Emma?
Yeah.
We have a quick question. What is the age of the child doing this work?
He's in 3rd grade.
Great, thanks.
Sorry, I forgot to mention. I meant to say what grade he was in. Sorry. This is then an example of his work towards the end of the year. As you saw, we did lots of practice in explicit instruction. This was explicit instruction in writing a paragraph. How do you write a paragraph? What does the first sentence look like? Well, how do you transition from sentence to sentence, idea to idea? We had outlines that we used with students so that they could fill in their ideas and take notes, then craft a full paragraph, looking at their outline next to them. We printed out transition words so that they can say, you know what, I do want to use a transition here. Okay, what's a good one to use? Here's a toolbox for me so I don't have to store them all. Oh, I really like that one. I'm going to use that to transition myself here. And I'm going to read this paragraph to you so that you can get a sense of where he came from the beginning of the year of really not being able to spell or have even fluid handwriting to a kid at the end of the year who wrote a really nice paragraph on the best foods. One of the best foods is a burger. One reason is it is yummy. It's super juicy. When you bite into it, the juice comes out. And here you can see even punctuation we talked about. When you have a sentence that starts with a when phrase, you put a comma. Or when you have a sentence that starts with a sentence starter, oftentimes there's a comma. Another reason is it's tender. As you cut inside, the middle is pink. The cheese is also good. Sometimes the cheese is stringy. For example, as you bite into the burger, the cheese stretches. Similarly, it is melty. At the same time, when you get your burger, the cheese is melting off. One of the best foods is a burger because it is yummy and the cheese is good. And for him, I think when he wrote this paragraph, I think he was surprised at himself because he came from being a kid at the beginning of the year who refused to write, who had breakdowns, who would be upset, to a kid who could easily write a paragraph and use all of the tools that were given to him because all he needed was explicit instruction and the tools to be successful. I thought I'd also give an example of some distance learning that has been done over the summer. As you all know, we've all kind of been scrambling in our world of, well, what does it look like if we're doing an online lesson or being in online or being at home distance learning? And in my struggle, I played with working with iPads and devices. And this was a student that I worked with, and we had decided to use the iPad to do writing. And she became pretty okay at writing on an iPad. And it's not an easy task, as I think a lot of you know. And you'll kind of recognize that, here are our sounds that I would say write was spelled A, her 4 ways of spelling A, she's circled and underlined. And this student is a second grader. I gave her words, she spelled them, and then we wrote a sentence that had some of those words in it that alleviated some of that cognitive load so that she could be successful in remembering all of the components to a sentence. And then you'll recognize here that she did chops too at the end. And I wanted to share that even though we're in distance learning, I find that I've tried my best to kind of translate that to Zoom tutoring or Zoom teaching. The iPad writing has been interesting. I've nixed it for now because it wasn't as successful as I think. This student's handwriting, while it's not terrible here, it's sure not this beautiful cursive. So I think I had to then say to myself, this wasn't best practices. It's time to move back to paper and pencil. But I wanted to show you an example that a lesson that you saw in cursive on paper has been then translated to an online lesson.
And Emma, what was the name of this intervention you were practicing?
Slingerland. And I'll show you a picture, I think, right now of some different intervention styles. So Slingerland's this one here. It's based off of Orton Gillingham, which is a picture right here. And Slingerland was the classroom approach to Orton Gillingham. Orton Gillingham was started and based off of a one-on-one experience. Orton Gillingham can absolutely and is translated into a classroom experience. But at the time, Slingerland kind of saw it and go, well, I want to do this in the classroom. How can I translate that? And at Northbridge, it was a good fit to use Slingerland because it was a classroom instruction that is designed for that. And so that's what was used. Slingerland is very popular in the, I don't know if popular is a good word, but I was popular in the Bay Area. I know I have a new lower school head and she's from the East Coast and she goes, I've never heard of Slingerland. And my coworker was like, it's a West Coast thing. It's based out of Washington State. But I wanted to talk about some outside supports because maybe you've never heard of Slingerland, maybe you have, but I'm sure you've heard of Orton Gillingham or Wilson or the Barton Method, Linda Bell. And how do you choose? How do I get the right support for my child? And I kind of want to talk about the difference between a tutor or a structured literacy tutor, which I think can be broken down to an educational therapist or a trained tutor. I oftentimes will call myself casually, at work, I'll say, I have tutoring after school. Well, usually tutoring is someone comes in, they don't always have a lesson planned, and they kind of maybe do some homework help. Someone who specializes in structured literacy or who's an educational therapist is coming to tutoring with a lesson in mind. They've planned a lesson out. They're doing that structured, they're diagnosing every day, they're diagnostic in their work of saying, what pieces are missing? How do I put those pieces, how do I give those pieces to you? And what method's gonna work best? What am I trained in? I think that's the biggest component. Someone who's a structured literacy tutor has training behind them. And I wanna say that some people may look for an ed therapist, but it's important to ask them, what trainings do you have? A lot of these trainings have weekend trainings. I did Orton Gillingham this summer, and I spent 2 whole weeks online learning the methodology of Orton Gillingham. I've also done another Orton Gillingham where I did 1 whole week of in-person training to practice the skills and learn. Slingerland training I've done, it's 4 weeks long every day. You watch a teacher teach a student, you then teach the student, you're observed, you get a lecture, and then you get practice planning your lesson. As you can see, I've taken 3 trainings at least, all varying in lengths of time and experience. Slingerland taught me a lot because I was observed. I was taking 4 weeks of an intensive course. When I then took other programs, they're shorter. I wasn't working with students. I didn't get necessarily the one-on-one experience or coaching that maybe Slingerland provided within 4 weeks. However, Orton Gillingham and Wilson will have programs where, yeah, maybe you do a week-long training, but then they have a practicum where students work for 9 months with a teacher one-on-one, coaching them through their lessons with students. And I think it's important to ask whoever you're working with, what training have you received? Have you practiced with somebody? And a lot of these trainings are hard because some of their trainings are, it was a weekend. Oh yeah, I'm Spire educated. I know how to teach that. Well, what does that mean, you know how to teach that? How long was your training? What experience have you had in it? And so when you're looking at working with somebody for outside support, I think it's important to look at, what are you looking for? Do you need homework help, just a tutor? Are you looking for somebody with structured literacy support? What level of training do they have? And then I think it's important to ask yourself, does my child need more than that? Oftentimes I work with students twice a week after school. Sometimes I have to think, what supports are they getting in school? And is that enough? Sometimes it is. Sometimes we need to boost after school tutoring to more than twice a week. And sometimes it calls for a specialized school where this is done intensively every day. And all instruction is really carefully planned so that students learn the way they learn best. And oftentimes I kind of look at it as, is your kid happy at school? And if kids are happy, they jump out of the car, skipping, bounding into that door, that's a question. Well, if they're happy, well, do you really want to make that shift for your family and switching schools? Or do you have the kid who's got the hood over their head and they're crying and they don't want to go to school and they're fighting you on those components? And I think you have to ask yourself that question of, where is my child and what do they need? And I think sometimes, a lot of times, our kids tell us in their social emotional world what they're needing. They might not tell us verbally, hey mom, hey dad, hey parent, adults at home, I need something different. That might look different for a kid. And so sometimes those specialized schools will really take care of those foundational skills at the pace that a student needs in order to prepare them to then re-enter another space.
Emma, I just wanted to comment a little bit. I think that's such an important point because I know that when all families, we get so many calls from families trying to figure out, well, how much support does my child need? This is what the assessment says. I don't know if it's enough. I think he needs more. I don't know if it's too much, you know? So I think that's a great point of looking at the social emotional cues for as another data point to consider when trying to figure out what is the right amount of support for the child. So thanks for bringing that up.
Absolutely. And it's usually the first question I ask when a family comes to me and goes, I'm thinking of switching schools. And I go, is your kid happy? And when they say no, their self-esteem is falling, I go, then it's time to maybe consider moving schools. Something parents also ask me is, what can I do at home? How can I support? And as an educator and as a teacher, I don't expect parents to be structured literacy experts themselves. You can't be. You're parents. That's your job at home. But things you can do is read, which I think is a really hard job when your child is struggling with reading. Because you as parent are then becoming a bad guy of saying, you have to read, it's so important, you have to do it. And some of my recommendations along the lines of reading are sometimes decodable text is really great because oftentimes they'll be successful because it's words that they can break apart that they've been working on either in tutoring or at school in a small group, or maybe even luckily, hopefully in their main classroom. But also acknowledging that asking a student who struggles to read is asking them to do a lot of hard work and that it's exhausting. I'm assuming so many of your kids come home or right now are at home and transition to school home life to home life and are exhausted from being online and just doing work. And I think that's where sometimes taking turns while reading can be helpful. And it can start out as, you know what, why don't you read one sentence and then I'll read the next? Or if that's even really hard, you read one sentence on this page and you could even choose what sentence that is. Maybe it's a sentence that has 3 words in it and I'll read the rest to you. And then it can grow from there once you see that they've gained that confidence of, why don't you read 2 sentences and I'll read 2 sentences? Or why don't you read this paragraph and then I'll read the next paragraph? And kind of go, why don't I read this page? You read the next page. And maybe you read the chapter, I'll read the next chapter. But I think what also has to be acknowledged here is that oftentimes when students struggle to read, they're not reading the books at their interest level. And that can be so devastating and doesn't foster that love of reading. And in order to get that piece, sometimes they need to listen to text. And I put this, I guess, picture from like the 80s or something of a cassette tape, because that is how I did most of my reading, which was listening to cassettes. And I think it's so important that kids get books at their interest level. And listening to those books will allow them to get the vocabulary and to really foster that love of reading, even though it might not be the traditional form of reading. And so many parents go, well, okay, so I've given my child, the audiobooks, or, we have Learning Ally, and that's all they want to do. They will refuse to read the decodable text that says, the cat ran. And I think that's a hard balance to make at home of saying, if you read one decodable book, I'll let you listen to 20 minutes of audiobook, or making a choice that's right for your family. But that it's so important that kids get that interest in books and get that in a way that they can access it. And what I say to parents is that it's so important for kids to just practice, practice, practice. The kids that I see make the most progress are the ones who do extra reading at home independently at their independent level. And that vocabulary then comes with that ability to listen to books at their interest level. Taking it a step even further beyond reading to discuss what they read. I have so many kids who, I read the book, and it's like, oh, really? What did you read about? Oh, I don't know. Oh, okay. Well, that's not great. So to discuss, well, who are the characters? What happened at the beginning, middle, and end? Just simple questions. Was it funny? Was it scary? Tell me something about it. If you want to take it even further than that, which I don't know anyone who would want to necessarily do that, especially in the time we're in, you could then give a writing assignment, which could be, what was your favorite part of the book? What character did you enjoy? What happened at the beginning of the chapter? Or what happened in the beginning of the book? What happened at the end? What was the conflict? And write one quick sentence. The conflict was that, blah, 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 blah. And finally, other ways to support your child at home. Find a good place to work. You know, we've trained our second graders that once you enter our Zoom room, you put yourself on mute. Anytime I call on a student, I'm always so surprised when I hear screaming in the background. And I'm like, oh my God, I didn't know that was your environment. You got sister over here, you got dad on a meeting, or you got someone talking about skiing in the background. And for me, I know I get distracted, you know, when my boyfriend walks across the room to, you know, do something and then goes back to his workspace. And it's like, what are you doing, man? I'm working here. Like, leave my space quiet and alone. And I can't imagine a student who's struggling in an environment where they're supposed to focus on the hardest thing in their life right now, maybe, and have all of those distractions. So finding that space, I have my space here at my dining room table. And I'm just so glad that none of you can see what it looks like because it's an explosion outside of whatever this spot is. But to have a space that works for you, that you know is quiet, that you know is going to work well, that where you're going to be successful. I think also creating realistic goals for yourself and realistic goals for your children. Tonight, the assignment is to finish X. You know what? Realistically, we're only going to get to this piece. And to communicate that with the teachers at school of this assignment might be too much. Maybe we do every other problem instead of every problem. Or maybe we work on this for 20 minutes instead of having to try and pull teeth and work on it for an hour. And creating those goals so that you can be successful. Making a schedule. I remember going to college and going, all right, like I only got 4 classes this semester. That's great. You know, I got ballet in the morning. I've got this big block of time before my psych class. It's awesome. Like, I'm just going to like hang out. Like 3 weeks into the semester, I was like, wow, why am I not getting any of my work done? This is a little bit hard. And I had to go to, you know, the learning services department or wherever I went to help me. And I went, you know, I'm having a hard time. And he went, remember I gave you that schedule with the time blocked out? And so that you could see, he was like, let's use that. Let's think, well, you got 2 hours between ballet and psych. I bet you could do an assignment in there. Plug an assignment in that you can accomplish in that time. Make plans to take breaks. Oh, you've got a time between these 2 classes. Maybe go for a walk. For me, I need to plan what that break is going to be. Because I say, I'm going to take a break. Well, I'm just going to sit there and go, well, I don't know what to do. I'll just plug away and do more work. And then I get more stressed and then I'm not successful. So I think it's important to kind of visualize what that schedule looks like in your day. And I know, like for me, using the calendar app on my phone, I can see all the classes that I teach, the kids that I tutor, and I can see where there's free time and where I can use it to maybe take a break or maybe plan a lesson or, you know, maybe contact a friend and take time for me. I think tools are also super important to use. At times, students are asked to do things that aren't yet at their level of being able to do it, but with assistive technology, it can even the playing field. And I think I said this before, but I use text to speech in my everyday life today. Anytime I get an email, it's often I have my computer read it out loud to me. Anytime I had an assignment, I had something that would read it out loud, whether it be a computer, whether it be, I know it's not called books on tape anymore, whatever it is now, MP3s, having it read out loud to me because it took too long for me to read it, which just caused more stress because I had less time to do the activity that came after the reading assignment. And by just having it read out loud to me, it allowed me to calm down and plan for what I needed to do. Maybe other assistive technologies such as speech to text or visual timers, being able to see, well, how much does 10 minutes look like? Oh, that's not a lot of time. I better get to work now and really focus. I know some people really benefit from apps that help minimize even distractions. I know advertisements get popped up everywhere when I'm on the internet. And whenever you're doing research or something, I don't know, research might be a heavy word, but anytime you're on the internet searching for something or doing work, an ad will pop up that's conveniently for your favorite store. And you go, oh, I wonder what the sale is today. Oh, and then all of a sudden you're down this rabbit hole of, I don't know, you've got 10 tabs open with different shoes on them. So minimizing those distractions can also be helpful. So many things I think can be put in place. And I think sometimes it's hard as a parent to know all of these tools and really being able to find an ally at school or outside of school to kind of help you with those pieces. So we've talked about what dyslexia is, the assessment component, structured literacy, that is science-based instruction to support students with dyslexia, and things that you can kind of do outside of school to support your child, and things that you can do at home that's not necessarily requiring you to be an expert. So that's the end of my presentation.